Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for the invite. Thanks for having me. I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to try and get through an awful lot, just to try and set the scene about organ donation in the UK, look at some numbers. We're also going to talk just for 5 minutes at the end about the upcoming change in the law. So, ultimately, organ donation, be it living or deceased, and we'll talk exactly what the difference is between them, involves an act of generosity from an individual, from those who love that individual, that results in saving and transforming lives, as we've just heard. If you are at end-stage failures of your heart, lung, liver, you will inevitably die from those conditions unless, within certain diseases, you can get a transplant. Kidney failure, which is by far the most common organ that we're talking about in terms of donation and transplantation, although we can maintain life on dialysis, you've just heard how it ruins a life. And you can't live forever on dialysis, as Sid has told us. And we can also donate pancreas and bowel for diabetes in the first one, and then very rarely in certain bowel conditions in children. So I just want to give a broad overview. What we're talking about is solid organ transplantation: heart, lungs, kidney, liver, bowel, pancreas. So we're not talking about tissue, things like cornea, heart valve, skin, bone. That's very different, with a very different set of criteria and thoughts and questions. We're talking about solid organs, things that save life. And we've got two broad types of donation. We've got living donation, and almost all of those is an individual donating one kidney, usually to someone in their family. So we've all got two kidneys. You don't need both of them, you can live with one. And so living donation, giving one of your kidneys to a family member, a loved one, a close friend, occasionally, completely altruistically, accounts for about 1,000 operations a year. So I'm not going to talk any more about living donation. So my colleague Caroline Rowe here is at the front. She can talk a bit about living donation. So that's completely different from the main topic we're talking about just now, which is deceased donation. So donation from someone who has died. We're going to talk exactly the circumstances in which this occurs. And there's two broad pathways that we're going to look at for donation following death. And that depends upon how we diagnose death. And I'm going to come to that with a slide just in a minute or two. So we're going to talk about death now, because we have to. Talking about death is often difficult in society. It's taboo, it's difficult. No one likes to think about their own death or their loved ones' deaths. But we're going to look at some numbers. So in the UK, per year, 600,000 people die, and just under half of them die in hospital. And of those, only a tiny proportion, about 3,500, could possibly become a solid organ donor. So the first thing to understand is that it is a very, very small proportion. The chances of you dying in a situation that you could become an organ donor is very small. You are far more likely to need a transplant. So less than 0.5% of all deaths in the UK could become a deceased organ donor. So it is a tiny but incredibly precious resource. And we've heard what it can do and how it can help and save people. So that's the first thing. To become an organ donor, you need to die in a very particular way. So none of us chooses how we die, but some people die as a result of a catastrophic brain injury in an intensive care unit, and that is the group who can become a deceased organ donor. In the UK for the last 10 years, we have worked incredibly hard to try and increase the number of organ donors to do more good, save more lives, get more people off dialysis. And we've had a lot of success. We have doubled the number of deceased organ donors in the UK over this time period. but it's still not enough. It's nowhere near enough. Here's some more numbers. So the green line at the bottom, about 1,000 a year. That's the number of kidney transplants from living donors. The blue line is the number of transplants from deceased donors. So that's kidney, but also heart, lung, liver, and others. So that sits around 4,000 a year. So we're talking about 5,000 transplant operations a year. And because of increases in both living and deceased donation, we've managed to bring the waiting list down. But as of 3 days ago, 6,094 people in the UK were waiting for a transplant. And many of those have been on for years. We have a shortage, our supply doesn't meet demand. Does it work? The answer is yes, it does. So for kidneys, at 5 years, nearly 90% of kidneys are working. For liver, 80%, and bear in mind if you need a liver transplant, you are desperately sick, and many of that loss is early. Lungs, similarly, 60% of patients are alive at 5 years, and these are patients who are in end-stage breathing failure, who would barely be able to walk 5 yards before they were breathless. And heart, similarly, it's about 70%. So these are tremendously successful treatments for lethal conditions that kill people quickly, sometimes in days, sometimes in weeks and months, and that ruins lives on dialysis. Lung, yeah, so 60% doesn't sound wonderful. This gentleman here, who we met last week actually, he's from Leeds, and he's had his lungs for 27 years. So these are averages. Some people go for decades with their organs. Just want to talk a little bit about death, and how we diagnose death. So, gets a little bit medical, but I'll do my best to make it clear. So there is one death. There are not types of death. There's not degrees of death. Death is binary. You are dead or you are alive, black or white. But we diagnose it in different ways. And we have 3 ways that we can diagnose death. So the first and most obvious is what we call somatic criteria. So if I open my wardrobe and there's a skeleton in there, I don't need to reach for my stethoscope to diagnose death. So we can, from very obvious appearances, make a diagnosis of somatic death. So that doesn't happen. That's never happened in my career, so we can put that aside. There are 2 broad ways by which we will diagnose death in a hospital, and one is far, far, far more common than the other. So the normal way which we diagnose death in a hospital is with what we call circulatory criteria. So we confirm that your heart has stopped and that you've stopped breathing. Everybody understands that, and that makes sense. About 1,200 people a year, and remember this is out of 600,000 deaths, have death diagnosed in a different way. What we call confirming death by neurological criteria, or more often referred to as brain death. And that is when there has been a catastrophic injury to the brain that has resulted in total loss of brain function. But your heart continues because you're in an intensive care unit on a ventilator, on a breathing machine. And in the UK, this doesn't project very well. A document was produced in 2008 which defined what death was. And it located all of death biologically to the brain, and specifically to the brain stem, and defined death as being the irreversible loss of the ability to be conscious and the irreversible loss of the ability to breathe. Both those functions, being conscious and being able to breathe, sit within our brain stem. And mostly, that bit of the brain dies because we don't pump blood to it, because we've stopped breathing and our heart stops. But just occasionally, that bit of the brain dies because of a catastrophic local injury or event in the brain. And so you can be in an intensive care unit with your heart beating on a breathing machine, but you have died. And that concept of brain death is very difficult for anyone to stop and think about and understand. And we'll hear later on in the afternoon about thoughts from Muslim scholars on that. So, to put this in what donation looks like on one slide, you have a catastrophic brain injury that you initially survive. A brain hemorrhage, stroke, cardiac arrest where your brain's starved of oxygen, trauma, infection, whatever reason, you have a catastrophic brain injury and you're admitted to an intensive care unit with machines, a breathing machine, other care devices aimed at saving your life. Sometimes, happily, and we're quite good at it really, we can save lives, but sometimes we can't. And if we can't, one of two pathways opens up. One, if your brain injury has been such that I will diagnose you having died, brain death, I will make that diagnosis, I will chat to the family, and I will explain that we have diagnosed death. We then ask the family for consent for organ donation, having explored that individual's wishes, see if they're on the organ donor register, and thereafter they go, heart still beating, for organ retrieval, which is an operation which involves an incision from the bottom of your neck to the base of your abdomen to remove those organs which can be utilised. And then once the organs have been retrieved, the breathing machine is stopped, the individual is cared for in a dignified and appropriate manner, and funeral arrangements and so forth take place. The second pathway, we're going to get told off for going too long here. The second pathway is you have sustained a terrible brain injury. You're not brain dead, but you have had such an injury that we think it is futile, that we know you can't possibly survive with any kind of meaningful outcome. And in discussion with the family, agree that we're going to stop life-sustaining supportive treatments, breathing machines, this, that, and the other machine, and let someone die peacefully with dignity. And if the family say they would like donation, and it's possible, we will monitor the dying process very closely. 5 minutes after the heart is stopped, that patient will then go to an operating theatre to have the organs retrieved. There's a very, very short period of time to do that after the heart is stopped. I appreciate that's quite technical, but I just thought it was important everyone has the start of an overview of what's involved. So, organ donation, supply doesn't meet demand. We've got over 1,000 people a year dying on the transplant list. We've got 30,000 people on dialysis with ruined lives, which we've heard very articulately described. And this other fact's one that we need to consider. So when we ask families in the appropriate situation of this very tiny and precious resource, a third say no. And it is that is by far and away the single biggest reasons we do not have sufficient organs for transplantation, why people endure years on dialysis and who die needlessly. Because individuals and families say no. So, a change in the law, last 2 or 3 slides, I promise. Currently, the law may be summarised like this. There has to be consent. Somebody has to say, yes, donation can go ahead here. And the best possible person to say that is the donor themselves, by registering a wish in life, carrying a donor card on the organ donor register, someone who's opted in life. If this was to happen to me, I'd want to save somebody or help somebody like the guys we've heard today. Most often, we don't know what that individual wanted because people don't talk about it, people don't go on the organ donor register, so most often we are asking for consent from families, family members. And very often, families will say, well, we don't know what he or she would have wanted, it's safer just to say no. And that's a big problem. There is a new law coming in very, very soon, in about 9 or 10 months. And this has got lots of names. Its official name is Max and Kira's Law, from two kids, one a donor, one a recipient. Other people call it presumed consent or opt-out. I shouldn't have put up that slide here. In essence, what it means is that if there is no record of your wish, the law will recognise that should you die, that you would have wished to be a donor. So at the moment, we only know that if you opt in. You go on the website and you make a positive choice to say, I want to be an organ donor. If you don't do anything, it will be assumed in law that you've given your consent for donation. So we're going to have three groups of the British population. Opt-in. People who still want to make it very clear they want to be an organ donor, who will go on the website, get a card, be an advocate. People who do nothing, and let's face it, most in society, this is by far probably the most likely thing. If you do nothing, it will be presumed that you wish to become an organ donor should you die in these circumstances. The third option, and this is the new option, it's been around since the Welsh introduced this law, as we'll hear a little bit later, is opt-out. So you go onto the website and you make a positive decision to say, I do not wish to be a donor. So that is the summary of how the law is changing. We'll have some time to talk about it at the end. And that is the website where you would register your decision. I do apologise for going on far too long.
Thank you very much.